Joining us now to discuss is Vivian Azer, who's a managing director at Cowen. Such a great pleasure to have you here with us today, Vivian.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. What does this mean for suppliers such as Canopy, Aurora, Tilray, as we're seeing these shortages really shake things up?
Certainly. So, given the robustness of the demand, the suppliers clearly did have challenges getting the stores full and adequately supplied. So, we've heard from the CEO of Canopy Growth that it's going to take them a couple weeks to get the supply and demand imbalance righted for them. The CEO of Afria said a couple of months. Our own survey work would suggest for e-commerce platforms in 5 big provinces, the market is now 57% out of stock.
Oh, wow. And so as we're watching this market and this shortage, these companies are taking a hit over the past week in terms of their stock price. Shareholder value has been plummeting, and it's been already volatile thus far. So what's your outlook in terms of long-term versus short-termism for these names?
When we think about disruption, and cannabis is surely disruptive, it's such a sea change in terms of consumer behavior, we think about it in the long term. In long term, I'm very bullish, but we do like to remind investors that cannabis stocks are incredibly volatile and not for the faint of heart.
And what is your outlook for the market here in the U.S.?
So we're watching the midterms incredibly closely. We think there are several catalysts at the state level. So Michigan has a ballot for adult use that's polling quite well. North Dakota has a ballot for adult use. The polling's a little bit more mixed. And then we're watching some really important gubernatorial races, right? So in Illinois, Pritzker's polling incredibly well, and he said that he would legalize adult use if he was elected.
Absolutely. In terms of companies as well that are getting more involved, more invested in the industry, Coca-Cola, earlier today, the CEO, James Quincey, actually said on its earnings call he has no plans to enter the cannabis space. What ripple effect do you think this has right now?
So you actually, and that was in response to my question,
yeah.
But you didn't really see the stocks react all too much on that news. It was pretty consistent with the response that I got from Indra Nooyi, Pepsi CEO, when I asked the same question on their earnings call. But it was interesting to me that in the Bloomberg article that suggested that Coca-Cola and Aurora were in fact in discussions, that Coke opted to comment on that, and they did acknowledge, that it's a space that they're looking at.
Well, clearly you cover the space, so you would ask a question related to what you cover, but why do you think it's important to ask it right now when we know that it's so early days in the U.S.? So
the question was very specific. It was non-psychoactive CBD, and if we want to really specify, it's hemp-derived CBD. And there is an act in the Farm Bill that would really clarify the legality of hemp-derived CBD. And so companies like Constellation Brands have said quite clearly, if the Farm Bill passes, they're entering the CBD market.
Were you satisfied by their response?
No, but not entirely surprised. I can see why they would want to play their cards close to the vest.
Do you think there is a time, if you had to put a range around it, that we do see all of these companies realizing that they have to take a stake in this industry?
So I don't think a company like Coca-Cola has to take a stake, but I think if you think about hemp-derived CBD as a functional ingredient, it's really something interesting to think about in terms of adding it to an isotonics or a sports recovery drink,
sure,
or adding CBD to a vitamin water as a functional ingredient as well. I think it's more imperative for the alcohol companies because we do fundamentally think that alcohol and cannabis are substitute social lubricants.
And you're the first senior analyst on Wall Street to cover this, so amazing, congratulations. What's that been like, and how are you maybe setting the tone for how other companies maybe also be covering, other research firms covering this space?
So we actually started covering cannabis in 2016, so it's been a long journey, but quite gratifying, in particular as the Constellation investments in Canopy Growth really kind of validated our thesis. So we're trying to put a traditional CPG lens on it. I've been covering consumer staples for over 10 years. You look at per capita consumption, right? And you look at category architecture and price points and form factors. This is all very traditional consumer staples analytics, and we're trying to apply that here.
Of course, all of these companies look at the carbonated soft drinks and try to see how that will really shake up their business, what the trends are that they can ride there. But you mentioned a critical side in the sports beverages as well, where you've got a company like Pepsi who has Gatorade, Coca-Cola who has Powerade, and they're both trying to figure out where they can work better with their athletes, and their athletes have been vocal about trying to be more open to CBD and the marijuana business. Do you think that athletes can actually drive more of a shift for some of these companies that are trying to figure out where they could play in this space?
You know, I think it's probably going to be more of an internal decision,
Yeah.
you know, really figuring out whether, you know, embracing CBD even is in line with corporate culture and, you know, what the best way to approach it will be.
I want to go back to the question about, you know, you being a trailblazer here. Is there enough data for you to go on? I mean, back in 2016 versus now, what kind of companies are you really looking for? Because we don't have so many of them at the moment.
So at Cowen, for the US data, we've got a proprietary relationship with a company called Headset. So we are getting state level data in California and Nevada and Colorado and Washington, and they'll continue to expand that. In Canada, like, we literally scraped over 1,000 SKUs yesterday to analyze the market.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great work there.
Absolutely. Vivian Azer joining us here today on Cheddar. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.
She is the managing director at Cowen and joining us for Cannabiz. Appreciate her time.